The U.S. Fred T. Berry was the destroyer transport appointed for naval force use in 1945. For the most part, being utilized in the counter-submarine fighting division from its send-off in 1963. It would see activity in the Eastern Pacific and all through the Caribbean prior to being decommissioned in 1972, done seeing use because of its obsolete gear. The naval force chose to sink the enormous boat purposefully off the shoreline of Key West, Florida, consequently making a fake reef at around 330 feet underneath the outer layer of the sea. Government authorities felt this was really smart to assist with advancing marine life nearby. In June of 1973, a group would embark to plunge the fake reef that was a little more than a year old. The four men, Musclehead Menzies, Robert Docile, Edwin Clayton Connection, and Albert Dennison, they left in a make-a plunge. The explicitly designed Johnson C. Interface, this submarine-type sub, was planned by Edmund Interface after a prior variant called the Profound Jumper was considered perilous at outrageous temperatures. The Johnson C. Interface got its name when J. toward the ocean, Johnson of Johnson discovered that his companion Edwin had been working with the Smithsonian establishment on the improvement of the Trailblazer little submarine, which was intended for profound sea research. After a $2 million stock gift to the Smithsonian, with extra totals being given as much as of $15 million, Johnson would represent the organization's biggest got gift. The C. Interface was featured by its unmistakable 5-foot breadth acrylic bubble, which is in the forward pilot compartment, and given an all-encompassing submerged view to the pilot. The back compartment is viewed as the lockout jumping segment, which permits two jumpers to be packed to the encompassing tension of the sea and pass on the submarine to work. Submerge. The Ocean Connect was the first of its sort to be made. For this reason, the group down in Key West, Florida, felt entirely okay with the Ocean Interface and their pilot Musclehead Mendez. That day, Musclehead had steered the Sea Interface multiple times throughout recent years, since its underlying send-off. Going with Musclehead in the forward compartment was Robert Resigned, who was a sea life researcher as well as a pressure physiologist. In the back jumping compartment was Edwin Clayton Connect, who was the child of the very man who planned the submarine that was involved that day with Edwin. In the back was Albert Smokey Stover, who was a submarine pilot himself, with many plunges guiding the Ocean Connect. Having a standard jump, made arrangements for the day to recover and mine some fishing traps that were left close to the depressed destroyer. The men simply expected to be in the water for about an hour. Being dressed prominently relaxed, the men were clearly anticipating only that this plunge would be number 130 for this particular vessel. It would occur on June 17, 1973. On that Sunday morning, the Ocean Interface was sent off from the examination transport, named Ocean Jumper, simply over the submerged U.S. Fredberry, as per the ensuing Coast Watch report. Soon after the boat was conveyed at 9:45 a.m. Menzies, the pilot pushed the vessel through the dinky waters of the Bay Stream, and the men would then hear what was portrayed as a cruel scratching sound of metal scouring against metal being moved off kilter by a startlingly solid momentum from the east. The sub had been ensnared on a link and was caught inside a trash field on the submerged Fredberry, 330 feet underneath the sea surface. The group cautioned the group on the Ocean Jumper and let them know that they were stuck. The group on board, called the Coast Monitor for salvage, told the men on board not to endeavor a lot to moderate anything, that oxygen was left in the vessel, being told from beneath that the team and the boat was in no impending peril. The naval force dispatched the submarine salvage transport, named the U.S. Stringer, from Key West. The Ocean Connection and Ocean Jumper groups thought about whether to utilize the submarine's lockout plunging capacities to permit one of the men in the jumping compartments to leave the sub and endeavor to liberate it from the link. This plane was immediately deserted on the grounds that it presented too grave a risk of oxygen poisonousness to Connection and Stover in the plunging chamber the roof team and pioneer Edwin Interface, who was in by and large charge of the circumstance, consented to anticipate the Tringa's appearance. Levels of carbon dioxide started to ascend in the pilot compartment when the CO2 scrubber inside the front compartment bombed. Menzies removed his shirt, discharged the carbon dioxide retentive from the scrubber into it, and held it before the coursing fanatics of the cooling unit, which thusly brought down the CO2 level in the pilot's lodge. The ocean jumper group determined that the CO2 in the roof would be adequate levels for close to 42 hours in the pilot compartment and 61 hours for the jumper compartment. These estimations, anyway, didn't consider that the plunging compartment protection would be delivered less compelling at the lower temperatures seen 300 feet beneath the sea surface. The acrylic plastic opening of the pilot compartment had a lower heat move coefficient than the aluminum opening of the jumper compartment, which permitted it to stay at a higher temperature for longer. The U.S. Tringa showed up on scene at around 4:15 p.m. and continued to make a 4-point more over the ocean interface. By the night of June 17th, the inward temperature of the aluminum plunging compartment had dropped to approach the temperature of the encompassing sea and was basically as low as 45 degrees Fahrenheit. By 10 p.m. the permeable capacity of the CO2 scrubber in the jumping compartment was depleted. By 10:25 connection in Stover was coordinated to start breathing from the air-provided mass that were a piece of the vehicle. Two hard cap jumpers from the Tringa endeavored to plunge to the roof and drew near to the point of seeing that the sub was ensnared in what resembled an enormous junkyard, however acknowledged they couldn't help, as the vessel was simply caught a lockout jump by connection, and Stover was yet again thought about. However, they communicated their craving not to lock out and direct. Menzies and the ocean jumping group concurred at this point. Connection and Stover were excessively cold to endeavor such a plunge. They had exchanged over to a helium-oxygen breathing combination, which brought about quick body heat. Misfortune. The barometrical tension in the plunging compartment had expanded to the surrounding strain of the sea at the roof's profundity, which was roughly 12 standard climates. Simply under an hour after the fact, at 1:12 a Menzies answered to the surface that Connection and Stover were enduring spasms. No further sound correspondences with Connection or Stover occurred after this point. A subsequent salvage jump from the Tringa was again fruitless. However, soon thereafter, the business rescue vessel AB Wood 2 showed up on scene, conveying a submerged TV camera with a flexibility stage. This gadget, transported down from the Maritime Weapons Lab in Post Lauderdale, Florida, had a camera that was utilized to find the roof. They then, at that point, utilized a catching snare that was joined to the camera and had the option to free one of the Connection's propeller covers, liberating it from the flotsam and jetsam field and permitting it to stream to the surface. The roof accordingly surfaced at 4:53 p.m. Menzies, and accommodating could promptly be taken out from the roof and were moved to the decompression chamber on board the Tringa. Anyway, with the plunging compartment being compressed to the lower part of the sea, any endeavor to eliminate Connection or Stover would have been lethal to them. This was expecting they were as yet alive. The ocean interface was then moved to the ocean jumper for clinical and salvage consideration. On board the ocean jumper, Connection and Stover were noticeable through the plunging compartment's little viewports, however gave no obvious fundamental indications, unfit to simply open the trapdoor because of the distinction in pressure. The compartment was force ventilated with a helium-oxygen blend, while outstanding compressed boiling water was showered ready to move on in an endeavor to raise its inside temperature, draining the serious strain from the compartment prior to opening it required hours during regular jumps. The Sea Connect can decompress in minutes, which is the reason the men in the forward compartment had the option to get away from death and just put in a couple of hours in the decompression chamber, subsequent to rising up out of the water. Tragically, the two in the back compartment were as yet compressed at 200 pounds for each square foot, thusly requiring a sluggish change in pressure. The following morning, on the 19th, Dr. Youngblood, on board the Ocean Jumper, would presume that Connection and Stover were dead. Around then, the compartment started to sit at a legitimate tension and had the option to be opened there. 2 men were dead. Youngblood would proceed to say that he accepts the 2 men had kicked the bucket even prior to coming to the help. Connection and Stover were brought to the Florida Keys Remembrance Emergency Clinic on Key West, where their post-mortem examinations were performed. The 2 men's reason for death were recorded as respiratory acidosis because of carbon dioxide harming the Johnson C interface. Mishap was researched by the U.S. Coast Monitor. The specialists inferred that the mishap was made by pilot mistake, perhaps due interruption, and by the entire state of the roof. As per the agents, the sub's secluded development of standard shapes and extremities give an amazing setup to trap by practically any sort of deterrent, notwithstanding the U.S. Coast Monitor examination. The Smithsonian Organization authorized an in-house examination. The report, named Report of the Johnson C Interface Master Survey, added up to 121 pages and gave explicit perceptions and suggestions to changes in plan and activity of the submarine. Following the passing of his child creator, Edwin Connect went through the accompanying 2 years planning an automated link perception and salvage gadget named String, which was intended to free snare submarines. A second Johnson roof sub would be planned before long, almost indistinguishable from the main. It would be sent off in 1975. Both the Johnson C-Link and Johnson C Interface 2 stayed in activity for a long time. Their work included looking at the disaster area of the U.S. screen in 1977 and recuperating the destruction of the Space Transport Challenger after its obliteration in 1986. These boats were resigned in 2011 after an extended residency in the ocean. The Connection establishment laid out the Albert D. Stover and Edwin Clayton Connect Reserve used to help grants and oceanography research in 1973. In 1978, Compass Distributions laid out the Public Sea Enterprises Affiliation Well-Being in the Oceans grant, somewhat in memory of Connection and Stover. That is the account of the Johnson roof disaster.